Okay, the most important person, the master of webinars, today's speaker is Carey. He is the Executive Secretary of the IEA Geothermal. We're very happy to have Brian today because he comes from a wonderful country of New Zealand, which is actually our hometown and our home country, where the IGA was founded somewhere, 30 years ago. And of course, another important person in the room is you, dear participant. All of you, we would like to congratulate you because you are a pioneer today, just like the first people on the moon. It's our first webinar in the series of free webinars, and we hope you will enjoy it as much as we have enjoyed preparing it. No more talking. Please enjoy it. Hope it will be productive and interesting. Don't forget to give us thumbs up of your reactions in the chat, some smileys if you enjoyed, and save your questions for later, because at the end you will have the opportunity to ask Brian directly. All right, Brian, feel free to start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Margaret, and I'm pleased to be involved today. So this is the first of a series of webinars, and I want to say thank you very much to IGA for making these webinars available. And IEA Geothermal have been involved in this first webinar and have put in the preparation for it at no cost. So I hope you enjoy the presentation today, and just as Margaret said, feel free to share it around and for others to make the most of the information that I share today. So I am Brian Carey, as Margaret said, and there's a few things there about me, but a couple of things. I'm a geothermal resource management specialist, and my background is mechanical engineering. I sort of have two roles. I work for GNS Science as my employer, and I also work under contract to IEA Geothermal, and I'm the Executive Secretary. So where are we and where are you? Well, if you follow the yellow arrow down, I'm sitting in New Zealand in a place called Taupo, and I'll show you where that is in a minute. And today here in Taupo, it's a lovely fine day, sitting at about 15 degrees Celsius, and the sun is shining brightly. So wherever you are in the world, welcome, and I do hope you enjoy the talk, and I do hope you can find things that you can access afterwards which help you on your geothermal journey. So here we are in New Zealand, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the places that are highlighted in yellow. So you can see Taupo with the dotted arrow to where I live in the centre of the North Island of New Zealand. And the Taupo volcanic zone is this yellow section that I've highlighted there, and we'll talk some more about the Taupo volcanic zone as we go through today. And there is an area up here in Northland of New Zealand called Nafa, which we'll also talk about a little bit. So the geothermal fields in New Zealand, which are used for power generation, are shown on the diagram. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about the ones in the south here, Wairakei and Tauhara. But the others we will also canvass through the webinar as we talk today. So just keep that plan in mind. You can see the Taupo volcanic zone runs down through this area here. So that encompasses most of the high temperature geothermal fields in New Zealand. Well, a bit of what I've done. So for over 20 years, I was the resource manager responsible for fluid production and fluid injection from the Ohaki geothermal facility and from the Wairakei Tauhara geothermal facilities. So I come with a good background in practical engineering and production operations, where I was responsible for the drilling and the workovers and steam field assessments. So that comes as part of the talk today, and I bring that for you. Today we're going to cover a number of things, and we'll just go as far as we can, and if we take too much time, then you will be able to get the presentation and look at the rest of it at your leisure. But I'm going to introduce you to IEA Geothermal. I'm going to provide you with a global view on geothermal energy, both electricity and direct use. We'll talk about fostering uptake and overcoming challenges. We'll talk about engagement with the community, with the government, with regulators, and with Indigenous people. I'm going to talk about investment and innovation, environmental aspects, regulatory, both policy and legal. I'll provide you with some insights from New Zealand and some insights from IEA geothermal nations. There's opportunity for some questions and answers as we go towards the end of the presentation, and then I'll make some concluding remarks to conclude the webinar. So here we go. IEA geothermal, it's got various names, but it's under the Technology Collaboration Program of IEA, and there's a range of information there, and there's our website is shown, the hyperlink to our website is shown there as well, so you can access our web pages at any time, and the free information available to you. There's a range of useful material, and I'll talk some more about that as we go on through. I guess my view is there is a lot going on in geothermal energy. I've got a lot to share, and today I'll share my insights. For me, it's an exciting time in geothermal energy, and it's a really, really interesting time around the world. There's a range of different things going on in different nations, and yeah, I think it's a pretty exciting time, and it's great. So back to IEA geothermal for a moment. There's a map there showing in blue the 13 nations which are part of IEA geothermal, and then we have 3 other parties, the European Commission and Spanish geothermal technology platform called Geoplat and Ormat Technologies. So we cross the globe. IGA has a broader coverage, but IEA has a globe spanning coverage as well. The organisation is collective, collaborative and collegial, and you've got 2 photographs there. The one on the top left is our meetings in Gran Canaria, Spain in April last year, and down on the right we were in San Jose, Costa Rica in November, and there's a photo of the participants in the executive committee. Another photo of our people. So we cover from on that slide from Germany, our chairman Lothar Wissing on the left, through a range of people, Australia, Switzerland, Iceland, Norway, New Zealand, Korea, and Germany, and these are our leaders basically in our tasks, and you can find task information off our website, and I'll give you some links to those too, but these are the people that run the main processes in IEA geothermal. We have 5 working groups: environmental, direct use, data and information, deep roots of volcanic geothermal systems, and emerging geothermal technologies. And you've got some hyperlinks sitting down there on the bottom that you can connect up with if you wish to connect up with any of those groups and any of the leaders of those groups. Chris Bromley, he's involved in environmental, sustainability, mitigation, monitoring methods, injection management. It's fair to say that I summarise the environmental aspect as taking care. It's a very, very important part of going forward with geothermal. It's taking care is my simple description. Katharina Link, she looks after direct use. She's from Switzerland. It's across all temperature ranges, from ambient to high temperature through to supercritical. It's all sectors: residential, commercial, industrial, so direct use, and it's booming. Data and information, Joseph Weber manages data and information. He works along with IGA on data, and basically we're looking to produce reliable geothermal statistics, both for geothermal power and heat. And it's a good place to go for data, is the Data and Information Working Group. The deep roots of volcanic geothermal systems, co-led by Gudni Axelsson from Iceland on the left and Chris Bromley from New Zealand on the right. It's really around collaboration, deep exploration, modelling, conditions and processes. It's really around ultra-hot geothermal. It's much more in the research environment currently. Very, very interesting work going on in the ultra-hot. One of our bigger tasks or working groups is the Emerging Geothermal Technologies Group, run by Josef from Germany and Christian from Switzerland. And essentially there's a number of subtasks, and I'll introduce you to the subtask leaders in a moment. But this is basically a group that's on top of the technology. So a good place to connect if you're looking for information on technology. And here they are, exploration. If you go to the right, you can see Inga Moak. She leads the exploration task. Measurements and logging. Further out to the right, there's Taejong Lee, so he's just down below Inga. Right out on the right-hand side is photographed. Drilling technologies, Manuel Richter. Reservoir creation and enhancement, Peter Mayer from Switzerland. Seismicity, Chris Bromley from New Zealand looks after seismicity. And above ground technologies, which includes corrosion, scale and tracing, is Jerry Muller from Norway. Now later in the webinar, I'll talk some more about national activity going on in IEA geothermal countries. We'll come to that and we'll cover off what's going on in the blue nations shown there on the slide. I now shift a little bit. I'm going to give you a global view on geothermal energy. I'm going to talk a little bit about generic types of geothermal resources and geothermal systems. And we'll include a little discussion on both electrical power production and direct use. So I have 4 generic types which I talk about, and they're available in various parts of the world. The lower temperature ground-based energy systems, geothermal energy systems, they're available worldwide. The conventional geothermal, which is where I come from, that's my background, it's available in some parts of the world. Enhanced geothermal systems, I describe it as make your own, and we'll talk a little bit about people that are making their own. And then there's the super hot, the deep, the superheated, the supercritical. That's the deep roots work that I talked about, the ultra hot. So conventional, well, there's a number of places where the conventional geothermal can be found, but for me and my background, it's where the plates meet. So where the big tectonic plates, and I've put a bit of a plan up there showing the tectonic plates from a plan from the USGS, where they meet. And down on the right, I've got a cross-section through the Taupo volcanic zone in New Zealand. And you can see here we have the Pacific plate is subducting under the Indo-Australian plate out on the left. And we have the Taupo volcanic zone, which is a rift zone, which is opening up, which is off the plate margin, but it's providing access for the magma and for the fluids to move through to the surface. So conventional, where the plates meet. And here's another schematic showing magma, deeper down, basically permeable formations which contain water, and cold water recharges into these permeable formations, and the heat basically forms the geothermal reservoirs, and the fluid will escape to the surface in some circumstances. In the New Zealand circumstances, it escapes to the surface. In a number of other places, you don't actually have any surface expressions. So that's conventional geothermal. Ground-based systems. I have on the left a system that's being put in Switzerland, where there are geothermal probes put into the ground. So these are wells drilled to, in this case, about 220 meters. And energy is transferred to and from the ground, and then is later used in your facilities to heat and cool your facilities. So on the right, you've got another way of looking at this. You can have pipe loops in the ground and at a shallow depth, and you circulate fluid through those, and you accept heat from the ground or put heat out into the ground, and you use it to either heat or cool your facility. And you're using a heat pump in this case to actually make the transition from the lower ambient temperature ground to the temperature that you need in your facilities. So these are ground-based energy systems. There are also a shift around the world to store and recovery of heat to the underground. And it's really about load balancing across the seasons. So you're using the underground as a big storage reservoir for heat. And there are two places that I note here. Basically, there's one in Germany out on the right where there is a power plant, basically, which is putting heat underground. It's basically putting waste heat from your industrial power production process. It's putting it underground, and then it's seasonally extracting it, and it's supplying the local town of Hamburg when that heat is needed. Also, Bern in Switzerland, there's a power plant which is doing the same, or is preparing to do the same, putting energy underground for use later on. Now, enhanced geothermal systems, the next sort of generic type. This is where you make your own reservoir, you create your permeability underground, you circulate fluids, and you produce heat. So there we are, a bit more of a close-up of the underground where you're looking to stimulate channels between pathways between the injection well, which in this case is in blue, and the production well in red. And the fluid which moves from the injection well to the production well basically extracts the heat. Now, a place where this occurs is Rittershofen in Alsace in France, and they have a 25 megawatt thermal facility which is using a reservoir which they stimulated to create the heat source for this facility. So we've talked about Rittershofen, but also Salts-sous-Ferrets in France, where there's deep-seated fractured granite with wells down to some 5 kilometres, and they are using that to produce energy for a small power plant, for a 1.5 megawatt organic Rankine cycle power plant. The Icelandics are also doing some work with stimulation trials into a well there in this field near Reykjavik. Switzerland, they have a test site for stimulation, and they are looking at stimulation over a scale of hundreds of meters at this Bedretto site, and the photograph on the right is of the Bedretto underground test facility. A really good place to go for information on EGS is the European Union De-Stress Project website, and I've given you the web address there, which you can access later. Back to ultra hot for a minute. This is the deep, the superheated, the supercritical, and here clearly I've got a magma body in the bottom here, and we're looking for systems which sit close to these magma bodies to get them hot enough. Magma may be sitting at 800 Celsius, and these deep superheated supercritical systems are looking to extract heat from probably above 400 degrees Celsius. Several places are doing this. So in terms of superheated, there's work going on in Los Humeros in Mexico, and the European Union GMEX project is a place to go if you want to find information on what's going on in Los Humeros. Supercritical, work has gone on in Italy at the Vanelli 2 well. There's work going on in Iceland. They've drilled 2 wells, IDDP 1, 2, and they're planning to drill number 3. Japan has studies going on at AIST and Kyoto University, and New Zealand has work going, just starting. It's called Geothermal the Next Generation, and that's just starting in New Zealand. So that's the ultra hot, and some connections there for you. Let's just look at electric power capacity, and I've got a quick graph of some stats. So if we go back to the 1950s, you can see here the growth. So on the left, the left axis is in is megawatts, and you can see it's risen to today. We're probably sitting about 15,000 megawatts, 15 gigawatts, and we're expecting to grow to probably about 18 gigawatts by the time we get to about 2024. So that's the electrical power capacity for geothermal facilities around the globe currently, and projected out 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Most of the power production comes from conventional geothermal systems, and currently that's probably at temperatures greater than 180 degrees Celsius, and most of the systems reliant on boiling, producing fluid up the wellbore from the reservoir. So most of these systems rely on boiling to produce the fluid. To date, there are just a few enhanced geothermal systems that have been engineered, and basically it's just a few megawatts for electrical generation currently, and a few tens of megawatts for heat production. But there's great expectations for enhanced geothermal systems, and there's a lot of effort going in, particularly in Europe and from the European Union to work to develop these systems much more. I'm shifting topics now just a fraction, and I'm going to talk about really how does it all work. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit from wells through to other aspects of the operations, just to give you some insights. Some of you might know this already, and I apologise if you do, but please bear with me, and we'll just work our way through it. So how do we produce fluids from the underground reservoirs up to the surface? Well, there's two ways. There's spontaneous production, so that's a well which will self-discharge. If it's in the hotter conditions, that will be a boiling well. Also, there's an opportunity to pump wells. So cooler wells can be pumped, and we'll talk some more about this as well as we go through. So at the surface, what do we do with these fluids we've produced, whether they've come up from a self-discharging well or from a pumped well? Normally at the surface, we look to use single-phase fluid streams for the power generation process. So we may need a separator in our process to separate the water and the steam. Sometimes two-phase fluids are used, and that occurs in a number of facilities. So they can be transmitted at the surface and can also be used. We'll talk now about self-discharging wells, and I've got a photograph of one here on the right-hand side of a well at Tauhara in New Zealand. So this is one of the wells which I managed and looked after, and this is some of my test crew who were discharging this well. So on this well, boiling in the wellbore creates the discharge. As the fluid travels up the well, pressure reduces, temperature reduces, and the steam fraction increases in the wellbore, which decreases the density of the fluid in the column and lets the well discharge. At the surface, you have a mixture of steam and water, and you can see that in this discharge. You can see there's water discharging around this area of the jet here, and the steam coming off in the center. Once you've got your two-phase fluid at the surface, you need to separate it into a vapor and liquid mixture, and the way you do that is your two-phase mixture comes up your well. Here it is here, coming up your well. You introduce it to a big vertical vessel, tall vertical vessel, and you put the fluid in on the side of the vessel. The fluid spins. The liquid is denser than the steam, so the liquid drops to the bottom of the vessel, and you extract the liquid out at the bottom. The steam is less dense than the liquid, and it rises to the top of the vessel, and you extract it through a tube, a pipe which you have that runs right up through the vessel to the top of the vessel. So that's where you extract your steam. So steam coming out in the red pipeline there. So the process is very simple, a very simple separation process based on density contrast of steam and water. Now, some wells won't self-discharge. So, excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. Some wells won't self-discharge. And you can use pumps to produce the fluids. Advantages of using pumps are you're moving a single phase fluid to the surface. You can get higher temperatures at the surface than if the well boils, because if the well boils, the temperature will decrease up the wellbore and bringing the fluid to the surface. So on the surface, you can get a better power conversion if you are pumping wells. And in some circumstances, you can obtain greater flow rates from a well. Also, with sufficient pressure maintained in your facilities, you will get less scaling, less corrosion, and the gases are kept in solution. So you have a more CO2 friendly emissions profile if you pump wells. So a bit about pumps. Some are designed for a little over 200 Celsius. flow rates normally less than 200 litres per second per well or per pump, and you can set them about 700 to 800 metres down a well. There are two types of pumps. There's electric submersible pumps, where you have the pump down the well, and you have line shafts pumps as well, where the motor drives on the surface. So for electric submersibles, the temperature range is normally less than 180 degrees Celsius, and for line shaft pumps, it's normally less than 210 degrees Celsius. And there's different working envelopes for obviously different types of pumps. Here we are, some photographs. So on the right is a large downhole pump from Sauerlach in Germany. On the left, sorry, on this here is the Sauerlach pump. On the right is a small pump going into a well in Taupo, New Zealand. And in the center is a schematic. So you have your pump down the hole with electric motor down the hole, and you have an electric cable bringing the power to the motor down the hole, and a pump discharge tubing which brings the fluid to the surface. So Germany has completed a lot of R&D recently on pumps, downhole pumps, and if you want a really good connection, Baker Hughes, Matisse Müller from Baker Hughes is a really good person to connect with. And I've noted there a presentation which he gave in Costa Rica, and you can download that presentation, and it gives you a really good insight into the work that's going on in Germany and some of the outputs from that work around electric submersible pumps. Line shaft pumps, the motor is on the surface, and there's a drive shaft which runs down into the well right to the pump which is in the well, but the drive is from the electric motor at the surface down a shaft to the pump that's embedded in the well. On the left, we've got a drilling rig putting a pump into a well. So that just shows you the pump and the screen where the fluid enters the pump system here, where my pointer is currently. And on the right picture, there's a photo of a large downhole pump which runs at Rittershofen. This pump here is a capacity of over 1 megawatt, and it's producing quite a lot of fluid from deep down. About the pump is about 700 meters down in the well. The USA has done quite a lot of work on line shaft pumps, and there's also great information in the Best Tech presentation by Julia. And again, you can download that from that web address, and that was a presentation she gave in Costa Rica in November, so it's right up to date. The most sensitive parts, the motor, the seals, etc. on the surface, they're easily accessible. And so what tends to happen is your line shaft pumps with the motor on the surface have longer times between servicing than do the pumps which have the electric motors down the hole. Now, as we talked about before, different fluid streams are used to generate power, so steam and water can both be used. Steam, the largest steam turbine plant, which is a single generator unit, is from Ngāra in New Zealand, 150 megawatt geothermal turbine. And just by way of comparison, organic Rankine cycle plants, probably the largest size turbine of these units are about 10 megawatts. And I'll talk some more about organic Rankine cycle plants a little later on, also called binary plants. Now, the water or steam can be fed to an organic Rankine cycle plant where the heat is extracted into a secondary fluid. But there are some turbines which use two-phase fluid. Only a small number actually operate, and they tend to be sub-megawatt sized units. And I've given you a company there which is producing them. It doesn't matter what type of turbine you've got, whether it's a steam turbine or a turbine in an organic Rankine cycle plant or a two-phase turbine, fluid expansion is the driving mechanism for them all. I'll just talk briefly about a steam turbine for a little bit. So your steam is entering your turbine and is expanded through the turbine, and normally you have a condenser associated with your turbine, and the reason for that is that by running the exhaust of your turbine at subatmospheric conditions, you will generate more electricity. So for a turbine which is running at relatively low pressure, say an inlet pressure of 5 bars or 0.5 megapascals, you will basically double the output of that unit if you have a condenser online than if you don't have a condenser installed in the power system. And the way you produce fluid for your condenser is that the steam is condensed in the condenser, and that heated fluid is introduced into a cooling tower. The cooling tower cools the fluid, and that fluid is returned to the condenser to go around the cycle again. As you have steam coming in, normally your make-up steam is greater than the evaporation from the cooling tower, so you have surplus condensate to inject. So condensing steam turbine, they're used really because of effectiveness and efficiency dynamics. To show you there a rotor, this is out of Wairakei, a large rotor from a 30 megawatt condensing steam turbine. So just for reference size, you can see a man standing here. So you can see the size of those turbines, they're extremely large. Also, just to give you a perspective on cooling towers, the cooling tower here on the left will be about probably 15 to 17 meters high. So these facilities are quite large, and the power plant facility here, the building will be about 25 meters high, and in this unit here there is one turbine of 50 megawatts. The unit here is at Pouhipi in New Zealand. Another photo of an organic Rankine cycle plant, just to give you an idea of dimensions. So these sit probably about 10 to 12 meters high to the cooling facilities which sit on top here, and the largest component of these organic Rankine cycle plants are the cooling facilities, organic fluid to air coolers. This one here is at Wairakei, a 15 megawatt organic Rankine cycle plant at Wairakei, New Zealand. So how do these organic Rankine cycle plants work? Well, you have heat coming into heat exchangers, which basically heat an organic working fluid that is a liquid phase, takes it through to a vapor phase. That vapor, organic vapor, is expanded through a turbine, and that vapor is then taken through a condenser, condensed back to liquid, pumped back up to the pressure conditions of the heat exchange equipment and the vaporizer to repeat the cycle. So the organic fluid goes round and around the cycle and is not used in the cycle, and the heat is basically taken from the geothermal fluid flow, whether it be steam or water. So the incoming geothermal fluid is cooled, goes out cooler, and this heat is transferred to the organic vapor. Now, there are a number of types of fluid that can be used. So common here in New Zealand is pentane. So a pentane working fluid is quite common in the New Zealand systems. To show you a photograph of the Te Huka plant in Te Taupo, New Zealand. This is a 25 megawatt plant. And here we have some major componentry, so major heat exchangers in the preheaters and in the vaporizers. So these are your key heat exchanger units. And you can see the size of these relative to the heat exchangers that are used for cooling, for condensation up above them. So the primary heat exchange units are quite small relative to the condenser heat exchangers. Again, just making that same point, you can see the units here, which are the primary heat exchangers providing heat to the system, so much smaller than the air-cooled condensers, which take the heat away from the organic vapor that exhausts the turbine and putting that heat up into the atmosphere. Just a photograph of the fans which drive that air extraction process for the cooling, and this one's at Wairakei, so this is looking down the condenser fan bank at Wairakei. Now, I've got some examples here of lower temperature power generation, which are quite interesting because in these examples, heat which was once used inefficiently or lost is now a resource to generate electricity. And I've got two examples which I'm going to show you. So I've got one from Fluda in South Iceland and one from Winton, Australia. In the Icelandic case, fluid basically leaves the wells, which produce at about 120 degrees Celsius, and enter the district heating network at about 80 degrees Celsius. Prior to putting in the power plant, which uses this higher temperature, reducing the temperature from 120 Celsius down to 80, the fluid was cooled by mixing with colder water and just distributing 80 degrees C fluid to the district heating network. So what the power plant has been able to do is been able to utilize more effectively the higher temperature fluid, 120 degrees C fluid, and they have installed a 600 kilowatt 4 modules of the Kalina cycle, and they are using this to drop the temperature from 120 degrees Celsius down to 80 degrees Celsius and then supply the district heating network. So here's a photograph of the facility. So that's using heat before it enters a district heating system. Now here's something that's quite different again. Here in Australia, they are extracting warm water, 86 degrees C water from the Great Artesian Basin for this community, and the water is used for community consumption. And what they're doing now is they're using a small organic Rankine cycle plant, so 250 kilowatt organic Rankine cycle power plants, to cool that fluid down to about 40 degrees Celsius before it moves into the community water supply system. This system has just become operational in recent months really. And before this plant was operating, what they used to do was they would bring out the hot water from the underground and they would basically cool it and discharge the surplus heat to the atmosphere to cool the water sufficiently to make it potable for community consumption. So just two interesting examples where water is being used more efficiently with power generation at the top end to cool the water, in the Icelandic case for that fluid to then enter a district heating scheme, and for the Australian case for that water then to enter a water supply for community consumption scheme. Okay, I'm going to flick now to direct use, and for me direct use is booming. Basically direct use is growing at greater than 10% per annum across the globe, whether it be in geothermal heat pumps or other direct uses. Now it's not only in energy, but it's also in jobs, which we're seeing the growth in direct use. So direct use has great benefits around employment and people involved in direct use opportunities. So whether it's a spa, whether it's tourism, whether it's glass houses and horticulture, residential and commercial, you can read them there, and there's more. Essentially, there's a smorgasbord of uses that are available for direct geothermal use. I'm just going to give you some photographs now of various facilities. So here's a spa and bathing facility in Switzerland in the western Swiss Alps. Here's a glass house operation in Austria producing tomatoes, which basically service the Austrian country of Austria. In New Zealand, this is a horticultural venture at Plentiflora and Horahora, and they produce flowers. And when you get the PDF of the presentation, you'll be able to link to the Plentiflora video, which I've linked there on the bottom right for you. In New Zealand, honey processing, so you use geothermal heat to assist in honey processing to make the honey more fluid so they can move it through their process. Here's an aquaculture venture in New Zealand where they're growing prawns, and the venture started growing prawns for production, and it very quickly shifted to growing prawns and selling prawns in their restaurant, which is in the top right photo here. They've got a restaurant on site, and then it came down to the bottom right picture, which became a tourist operation as well. So the prawns basically are grown in the ponds, and they feed both the restaurant for prawn supply, but also people come and fish for prawns and catch prawns and enjoy the water park, which is associated with the prawn ponds. Timber industry in New Zealand, this is the significant user of geothermal direct geothermal energy in New Zealand is the timber industry. some of those products that are created from timber, tissue products, and Asaleo Care here in Kawerau produce tissue products for hygiene. I'll also give you a link for a video to watch a little video about their production from geothermal, interesting little video. Milk processing in New Zealand, where direct geothermal is used to produce clean steam and basically run dairy factories, and there's 2 now in operation in New Zealand. This is the first one, Miraka at Mokai. And now I'm going to shift a little bit to something that's quite different. So here's a laundry. I take this photograph. So this is your outside laundry and your geothermal pipes running along the above the laundry here. Cosmetics and health products and minerals. So Iceland in particular has got quite a bit of work going on around creating health products, cosmetics and supplement products for people to use. Also very interesting in Iceland, resource parks where things are all integrated together. So you have your power plant and then it supplies water for bathing. So at the Blue Lagoon, there's then a hotel, the centre photograph in the top here. They're then using it for, down on the left-hand bottom photograph, for growing and basically bioculture. There's a conversion process to making methanol, that's the centre photograph at the bottom, and there's some algae production on the right. So utilising the whole gambit of the geothermal resource for a whole range of direct uses, in this case after power generation. In Japan, really interesting, they use the gases from the geothermal to set the dyes in beautiful fabrics and beautiful products. So there's a photograph of the Japanese, some of the products produced. Now I'm going to just go to New Zealand just quickly, and we'll run through some of these and give you a New Zealand flavour, and we'll move this through. So New Zealand, we're being strategic. So even though New Zealand has been using geothermal energy since the 1930s and industrially since the mid-1950s, more needs to be undertaken in our country to foster geothermal use. So, you know, we've got about 1 gigawatt of electricity capacity. So if you think back to the world capacity, we're sitting at about 15 gigawatts. New Zealand's got about 1 gigawatt. We generate 17% of our electricity from geothermal, and in the future there will be more. We also have a strong focus now and a growing focus on direct use. We're looking to move process industry to lower carbon energy sources. And on the right is the photo of a cover of a recent action plan which the New Zealand Geothermal Association has produced, which looks to foster further the uptake of direct geothermal in New Zealand. So there's the strategy, and then under that we've got these action plans, which are like 2-year plans which work together to push forward to reach the goals of the strategy. We talked a little bit about this, timber and pulp processing in Kawerau. So here's a aerial shot of the facility at Kawerau. Mount Putuaki, the volcano here in the background. Town of Kawerau, just sitting on the right-hand side of the photograph. This site at Kawerau is the site of the largest direct use of geothermal heat at one site anywhere in the world. There's an interesting case study on Kawerau, and if you want it, again, the URL is at the bottom of the page there, and you can access that and look at that case study. And just so you know, Kawerau, the energy used by the Kawerau site facilities sits at around 6.5 petajoules per year. So the left-hand axis here is in terajoules per annum. So if you convert that to petajoules, it sits at about 6.5 currently. And you can see here it started in the mid-1950s. This is 1956 down the bottom here, and it's sort of steadily grown. Now at Kawerau, there was a really interesting development pioneered. It's called geothermal condensate recovery. And what had been happening at Kawerau, the geothermal steam had been been used to power the industry, but once it had been condensed down to condensate, the fluid was just discharged to the surface. The Kawerau engineers decided that they could actually use that condensed geothermal condensate and they could recover it. And so what they did, they developed this system of flash tanks and cleaning columns called stripper vessels, where the geothermal steam condensate, which is low in minerals but high in gases, is fed through these two vessels, and it comes out to the point where the blue stream is clean enough to be processed feed water for an industrial boiler. So this process essentially treats geothermal condensate, takes the gases out of it, and provides low mineral, high pH fluid for processed steam. This process was developed in 1988 at the Tasman Pulp and Paper Mill. And then the process which I just talked about, the white vessels on the right, is then integrated with heating equipment, with a reboiler. So you have your geothermal steam comes in, where in the vaporizer you are vaporizing to clean steam, and then the condensed geothermal steam flows through into a preheater where more heat is taken out of it, and then that geothermal condensate is then fed into the process cleaning arrangement, the two vessels which produce the clean feed water, and then the feed water comes from that process, is heated, vaporized, and becomes your process steam, which goes to your process. So this integrated reboiler process was the first around the world, and it's been operating in Tasman Pulp and Paper for over 30 years. Great little process. And I just show you a photograph of the vessels on the right. So these two smaller tanks are the flash tanks, and the two taller vessels on the left are the stripper tanks. And here you've got two process trains. So you've got 50% redundancy in this system for producing clean processed feed water that is used to power the pulp mill. Now in 2010, this was picked up by Carey, the tissue maker, and basically they were able to reduce their CO2 emissions from their plant by converting from natural gas to geothermal by about 30%. I think the number is, maybe it's closer to, yeah, let's say 30%. So they had a significant reduction in CO2 emissions from their plant, and they've continued to push that forward today and achieving even greater CO2 emission reductions as part of their conversion to geothermal. I'll just show you the internals of some of their plants. So in this plant here, we've got these big horizontal vessels here, which are the vaporizers, and the tube bank on the right here is a vaporizer tube bank which comes out of those big vessels. So that's the internals. The bottom right shows you the internals of the big vaporizer vessels on the center of the plant there. Muraka, now they picked this up in 2011, so they decided they were going to also use this geothermal steam to process steam process in 2011, and so Tuarapaki at Mokai not only have a dairy factory, but they have major farming operations. So they're major dairy farmers, and the farming operation basically supplies the milk factory, and then the milk factory has some waste which basically supplies a worm farm, and the worm farm supplies a native plant nursery. The native plant nursery finds plants back to their dairy operations, and they also have a glasshouse operation which is powered by geothermal, and so the geothermal provides energy for the glasshouse, and the glasshouse provides materials for the worm farm waste, as well as also obviously for production for the sale of tomatoes and capsicums. So Tuarapaki basically have a power plant, and together they have, with their vision and their co-location and their integration of facilities, basically have got a really good arrangement going. It's a bit like the Icelandic resource park, but these are great big integrated operations which they've got going here. Now, minerals at Ohaki, in recent time there is a look, this is turning, can you shut the door? This is just turning into a disaster, I'm sorry. We have had a fire alarm here, and basically I'm going to have to leave. I've just been informed by the warden I have to leave. So if you just wait for a few minutes, wait around, I will come back. Hopefully it's just a false alarm. So I'm terribly sorry. But I have to leave. Hello there.
Great to see you back. Welcome back. I hope everything is fine.
Yes, I think we're fine. Okay, so I'll just continue on. So actually, I'll just have a drink before I do. So excuse me. So another use of geothermal is the fluids itself, and for minerals extraction. And work going on at Ohaki. There's a company called Geo40, and they're commercially extracting silica at a small scale. And then basically they're researching for other species, particularly metals, and lithium is one of them. Again, their web address is given below. Now, New Zealand is also commencing supercritical research, and you've seen this little diagram on the right before of the Pacific plate subducting under the Indo-Australian plate in the Taupo volcanic zone. And we believe at deeper depths, possibly down to 5-6 kilometres here in the Taupo volcanic zone, we will be in supercritical conditions, i.e. probably around 400, maybe a little bit less, 400 degrees Celsius, with wells that are drilled that deep. And they're going to come in time in New Zealand, but at the moment there's some research work going on to prepare New Zealand for that time. I'm switching topics now and just talking about fostering uptake and overcoming challenges. I have some sort of personal perspectives on this, and I want to share those with you. So for me, one of the key things is to be open, to let people see in as to what you're doing. People don't understand geothermal. I've sort of come to realise that as part of my, through my career, and we need to help them to understand. In lots of ways, and often in some places, geothermal can be actually invisible and you can't actually see it. So you've actually got to talk about it, and you've got to show people the invisible, if you like. I also believe in sound environmental practice around environmental care and environmental sustainability. Your nation needs to have a stable legal and planning framework, and I'll talk some more about that later. And essentially I encourage parties to engage with the community and basically develop a sustainable ongoing relationship with your local community and the broader community to facilitate your ongoing use with time. So your policy and planning framework, you need a permitting framework that facilitates whilst caring for the environment. So you've got to balance that, a framework which enables, but a framework which cares. And you can achieve that. There's no question about that. You can achieve that. This framework needs to be stable, and the framework needs to recognise the value of the underground heat resources, and the framework also needs to promote sound environmental and geothermal resource management practice. It will provide, or can provide, surety for resource use, and in fact your investors need that, and a surety of returning revenue to finance the ventures. So an investor needs to know that in time his investment is going to return for him or her. So the framework needs to provide surety of the use, and over a longish period of time that they will be able to achieve their financial goals over that period of time. Also, a key in the New Zealand environment is Indigenous people's involvement, and a number of the Maori trust groups and parties are now active investors in geothermal energy, and I think it's a key to any nation's journey is the involvement of Indigenous people, and certainly it's a key to New Zealand's ongoing journey and the sustainability of our geothermal utilisation. So take your broader community with you. Long-term use requires this, requires community acceptance for the long term. I think social license is probably the term that is bandied around a lot these days. And you've got to work on it. It just doesn't happen. So I encourage engagement with Indigenous people, with the government, with the regulatory authorities, with the broader community. Good information is important, and I think from my perspective, case studies and fact sheets have been useful for us here in New Zealand. Again, I've just got three case studies that we've prepared. Also the web address where you can access those. Some fact sheets, also some web addresses, a web address where you can access those. But we have found these case studies and fact sheets are very useful tools for people to access just at their leisure and come to understand some more, and give them connections where they can connect up with people if they so wish. I'm going to change now to innovation and investment in innovation. I think it's really important in the current environment with the significant energy transitions that are occurring. Innovation is a key to those, key part of those transitions. And I say watch the European Union space, because in the European Union space, there's lots of well-funded R&D geothermal projects. And I mentioned just the Deep Geothermal Project, ETIP-DG, which is one of the overarching frameworks. Keep a track of that, and you'll learn some things, I'm sure. The proposed investment between 2020 and 2030 is of the order of 1.8 billion euros. And I guess my view is that where R&D projects are funded to this sort of level, you will see advances. So I would encourage you to keep on top of the European Union space and basically just keep track of what's going on with the projects that are coming out of the EU. Now, how are we going for time? Gregor, I've got quite a bit more about various nations, but what I could do, if you like, I could skip this, and people can then just look at that at their leisure, and then basically we can draw this in, because I see I'm just nearly sitting at about an hour now with my little interruption. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we share the presentation with the participants later. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So there's a number of slides in here where if you look at them, you can gain insights into what is going on in each of the IEA nations. So each of those nations in blue has work going on, and I have summarized that up into like 1 or 2 slides for each of the nations, and you can get the benefit of that. The other thing is IEA Geothermal writes up an annual report every year, and that annual report basically summarizes what is going on in those nations. So if you want to keep up with what is going on in the IEA geothermal nations, you can use the annual report to find that material and to be up to date with what's going on. So I'll just move us forward here for a second. Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go to my concluding remarks. I've got a few slides for you on my concluding remarks. So, good connections for you to follow up: the International Geothermal Association, IEA Geothermal, Women in Geothermal, that's WING, and your national association. And I've got just some slides on each of these, just very briefly. So IGA, the team at IGA, you can join through your national association, or you can join direct. And One of the things I really like about the IGA is the paper database, and for me it's simply the best place for accessing geothermal papers. If you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to come to the World Geothermal Congress in Iceland in April and May of this year. So again, the web address is there for you to connect up, register and come along. It's going to be a great event. Women in Geothermal, it's inclusive, men are welcome, and again a web address for you to connect up with Women in Geothermal team. Just talk about IEA Geothermal for a minute, because the presentations from our workshops, you can download them from the website, and there's loads of workshop and seminar presentations, and you can download at your leisure, and you get lots and lots of up-to-date information from various parts of the world and from a number of significant experts that speak at those workshops. We've got 2 seminars coming up. We've got a North Atlantic Geothermal Seminar, 5th and 6th of March, in association with the Geotherm Expo and Congress in Germany. And we have a Mine Water Geothermal Energy Symposium on the 22nd of April, in association with a British Geological Survey. That's in Edinburgh and in Scotland. Details there for the programs and the registration. And I also just gave you there a link. I talked earlier about the IEA Geothermal Annual Report, and basically I've given you a link where you can access that material from. Just to finish, vision drives activity, and SWM in Munich, that's the local utility, has a vision of 2025 100% renewable electricity for the city of Munich, and by 2040 100% renewable heat. And they're driving forward in a magnificent campaign to achieve that, and it's their vision which is driving what they're doing. So my question for you is, what is driving your geothermal vision? What is it? What is driving you? What vision do you hold that is pushing you forward, pushing your nation forward to see geothermal grow in your nation? Be strategic about it and act now. Don't delay, act. And that's me done for the day. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Kia ora.